It was the sort of day that Ellie had dreamed of for months, one where the family could finally enjoy the mountains together. Despite the busy life she led as a former park ranger, her devotion to Daniel, Rachel, and her granddaughters, Ivy and Wren, never wavered. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that felt like a fresh start, the perfect moment for a family adventure in the very place that had shaped her life. As Ellie stood at the base of Glacier National Park, breathing in the cool mountain air, she felt the pulse of excitement that always accompanied a new hike. The snow-covered peaks glittered under the early morning light, the sky a brilliant, clear blue that spoke of an idyllic day ahead. Ellie had been expecting to join them, but a charity event she had committed to months ago had taken priority. It was a fundraiser for wilderness education for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. She had hesitated, wanting to join her family on the hike, but when Daniel called and cheerfully insisted, "Don't worry, Mom. The girls have been asking about you. They want to hear Grandma Ellie's stories." Ellie had promised to catch up with them next time. She had heard the warmth in Daniel's voice, the way he laughed, and felt the pang of longing to be with her family in the wild. But she understood the importance of her other commitments. She had promised herself that this time, she'd stay back and make it up to them later. But there was always that part of her, the one that had spent decades navigating the wild with a sharp, calculating eye, that wanted nothing more than to be on those trails. She had planned to follow them, taking pictures, sharing in the joy of the hike. But fate had other plans. It was a typical Saturday, a routine day, and everything had seemed perfect until the message came. The afternoon had come and gone in a blur of charity event details. Ellie had kept herself busy, setting up displays and engaging with other volunteers at the fundraiser. She'd spoken to so many passionate people, shared stories of her days in the park, and felt a sense of pride for the work being done to give more children access to wilderness education. But amidst all the bustling activity, Ellie's mind wandered back to her family. She had thought of them often, especially after Daniel's call, and the longing to be with them in the mountains only deepened as the day wore on. She had just finished setting up a display when her phone buzzed. Message from Daniel. She paused. It was a picture, a family portrait taken just hours earlier, the four of them grinning against the iconic backdrop of the park. Daniel, wearing his favorite green hoodie, stood proudly in the middle, his arm around Rachel, who smiled with her usual warmth. Ivy and Wren, wearing bright yellow and purple jackets respectively, stood next to their parents, their faces beaming with the innocence of childhood, their smiles wide and carefree. Ellie had smiled back at the photo, feeling the rush of love and nostalgia flood her chest. She noted how they had taken the photo in the same spot they always had, a place that had become something of a tradition for their family hike. It had been a simple snapshot, nothing extraordinary, but to Ellie, it captured the essence of what family meant: love, togetherness, and the joy of shared moments in nature. She sent a quick reply, smiling at the memory of them all together on the trail. But she couldn't shake the nagging thought that something wasn't quite right. It was a fleeting feeling, one that Ellie pushed aside as she returned to her work, feeling her heart full from the connection to her family that the picture provided. It was when Ellie returned home after the charity event that the unease began to settle in. She had expected to hear from Daniel again, but her phone buzzed with a different message, a short text. It was from him: "Weather's turning bad up here, cutting the hike short. Talk later." At first, Ellie thought nothing of it. It was common for weather to shift suddenly in the mountains, especially in the unpredictable late fall. Daniel had always been careful when it came to weather patterns, and if he was cutting the hike short, it meant he was doing the smart thing. Ellie had trusted him. No one knew the mountain trails better than he did. But when she tried calling him back immediately, the call went straight to voicemail. The same happened with Rachel's phone. Her pulse quickened. Ellie tried not to panic, telling herself that it was probably just a spotty connection. It wasn't unusual for cell service to drop in certain areas of the park, especially in remote locations where the weather was changing fast. She turned to the other volunteers who were wrapping up for the night and tried to push the worry from her mind. "They're fine," she told herself. "It's nothing." As evening set in and the sky darkened, the familiar comfort of her home did little to ease Ellie's growing concern. She tried calling again. Nothing. The hours ticked by. By now, Ellie had worked through the routine of trying to call, leaving messages, pacing the house, and checking the clock. By the time the evening had fully descended, Ellie's calm exterior was beginning to crack. Her gut told her something was off, even though her rational mind pushed the fear aside. But when the night slipped into the early hours of Sunday morning, and she hadn't heard from Daniel or Rachel, that fear solidified into something darker. What if something happened? She dialed the police department. The phone rang, and when the officer picked up, Ellie explained the situation calmly. But she couldn't help the tightness in her voice. She gave details about Daniel and Rachel, their usual hiking paths, and the fact that the weather was worse. She requested a search. By morning, the search for the Whitaker family began in earnest. Volunteers from the community, many of whom had known Daniel as a child, rallied to the cause, combing through the most frequently used trails. Helicopters took to the air. Ellie joined the search teams, her heart torn between disbelief and an instinctive urgency. Ellie couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Daniel had always been cautious, always respected the unpredictable nature of the mountain. The idea that he would have put his family in harm's way felt wrong on every level. She knew her son better than anyone. There had to be more to the story, something beyond a simple hiking accident. As a seasoned park ranger, she had always been calm in the face of crisis. She had led search teams into the wilderness countless times, guiding them through blizzards, wildfires, and mountain rescues. But nothing could prepare her for this. Nothing could have prepared her for the possibility that her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren might not come back alive. Ellie's mind raced as she joined the search party. The air was thick with anticipation, anxiety, and the sharp sting of cold. Snowflakes fluttered down from the sky in delicate swirls, but Ellie could barely feel them against her weathered skin. Her heart was pounding, each beat drowned out by the haunting thought of her family, lost, cold, and possibly in grave danger. Despite the growing concerns, Ellie remained composed. "This is what I do," she reminded herself. Years of experience had hardened her resolve, but nothing in her career had prepared her for this kind of emotional turmoil. Even though she knew the mountain like the back of her hand, knew every ridge, crevasse, and trail, this time was different. This time, it was her family she was searching for, and it felt as though every step she took was a step into a nightmare. Ellie was joined by a handful of park rangers, law enforcement officers, and volunteers from the community. They spread out across the park, working in teams to cover the most popular trails. Helicopters patrolled the skies, their rotors chopping through the frigid air as they scoured the mountainside for any sign of the missing family. Ellie's keen eyes were scanning the ground for any indication that her family had passed through. Broken branches, disturbed snow, footprints in the fresh powder. Her thoughts never strayed far from the last message Daniel had sent her. "Weather's turning bad here, cutting the hike short. Talk later." Ellie knew the mountain, and she knew Daniel. He wouldn't have taken risks with his family. They must have been caught off guard by the storm, she thought. If only he had turned back earlier. If only she had been there with them. By mid-morning, the search teams had already covered the first round of popular trails. Ellie had helped organize the operation, assigning groups to specific areas, coordinating with helicopter teams above, and carefully mapping out the regions still left unexplored. But there were no signs. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate that the Whitakers had made it as far as they should have. The mountain was eerily silent, its vastness seeming to swallow all hope. Ellie walked briskly alongside a few of the volunteers, exchanging pleasantries with them as they trudged through the snow. Some of the volunteers recognized Daniel from his childhood. He had grown up on the park's trails, always by Ellie's side during her early ranger days. They knew him as an avid outdoorsman, an experienced hiker. To see him missing along with his family was a shocking blow to the small community. As Ellie led her group deeper into the wilderness, she found herself replaying the events of the day they went missing. She could almost hear Daniel's voice over the phone, his warm laugh filling her ears as he told her how much the girls had wanted to hear Grandma Ellie's stories again. The memory brought a bittersweet pang to her chest, but she quickly shoved it aside. She couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her focus. They continued to search through the trees, up and down the trails. The snow was deep, and the wind howled through the pines, making the landscape seem even more treacherous. Ellie was methodical in her search, her eyes darting over every inch of the ground. Where could they have gone? She couldn't make sense of it. She had known Daniel. He wouldn't have taken them into any dangerous area. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip behind the mountain peaks, Ellie's anxiety grew. They had scoured several miles, but there was still no sign of her family. At least the police hadn't voiced it yet. But Ellie was beginning to feel it in the pit of her stomach, the growing certainty that the situation was dire. The search continued into the evening, but as the hours passed, Ellie felt her hopes slowly starting to fade. Her experience in rescue missions had taught her to keep her emotions in check. But this was different. This was personal. By the second day of searching, the weather had deteriorated further. Snowstorms whipped through the park, obscuring visibility and making the already dangerous terrain even harder to navigate. Ellie's face was pale with exhaustion, but her determination never wavered. The team pushed through the thickening snow and treacherous trails, knowing that every minute counted. But the longer they searched, the more the fear set in. The Whitakers had vanished without a trace, and no new clues had surfaced. The helicopters had failed to spot any sign of the missing family from the air, and even the most experienced rangers were becoming concerned. Ellie too was beginning to wonder, had they made it past this point? Were they even alive? As the day wore on, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The situation was starting to feel more like a tragic accident, something that Ellie wouldn't accept. She clung to the hope that the family had found shelter somewhere, that they were just waiting for the weather to clear up before returning. But deep inside, Ellie knew that wasn't likely. The longer they stayed out there, the worse it would be. Ellie paused at the base of a ridge, staring up at the steep, craggy path ahead. She felt a sudden chill, not from the cold, but from the realization that perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps this wasn't a simple accident, but what else could it be? As the days passed, the official search efforts seemed to slow. Ellie had been working closely with law enforcement, but the authorities, though sympathetic, began to scale back their operations. The weather had worsened, and more search teams were needed for other areas of the park. The search effort shifted focus, and Ellie knew it. It was hard for Ellie to accept that the search was being reduced, but she refused to back down. She knew that if anyone could find her family, it was her. She had spent decades navigating this wilderness, and now, it felt like the mountains were testing her in ways she had never experienced before. This time, the stakes were personal, and Ellie would do whatever it took to find her family. Detective Marshall, the lead officer on the case, pulled Ellie aside as the search efforts began to slow. "Ms. Whitaker, I'm afraid we have to start considering the possibility of an accident," Marshall said softly, his voice heavy with sympathy. "The weather is making it impossible to continue a thorough search. We've done everything we can." Ellie refused to accept this. "You're wrong," she said, her voice firm, almost defiant. "My son wouldn't have put his family in danger like that. He knew these mountains better than anyone. He would have turned back before the weather got that bad." Marshall's face softened, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving Ellie standing on the mountain's edge, staring out into the snowstorm, feeling as though the weight of the world was on her shoulder. It wasn't until the third day of searching that Ellie's luck began to change. She had been walking along a trail near the northern section of the park when she noticed a figure emerging from the trees. A man dressed in camouflage approached her with purposeful stride. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath visible in the freezing air. Mind if I take one of those? He gestured to the missing person flyers Ellie had been handing out. Ellie turned to face the man, studying him with keen eye. He was older than her, with a thick beard, and the kind of weathered look that came from spending too much time in the wilderness. Of course, Ellie said, handing him a flyer. My name's Cal Jennings, the man said, taking the flyer. I'm a local hunter. Been coming to these mountains for 30 years. Ellie nodded, recognizing the name. She had heard of Cal. He was a frequent visitor to the park, often seen hunting game and setting up trail cameras to track wildlife. I've heard of you, Ellie said, her tone polite, but distracted. She had a lot on her mind. I know you, Cal replied. You're the ranger. I've seen you around. You're the one who teaches wilderness survival, right? Ellie nodded again. That's right. What brings you out here today? Well, Cal said, shifting on his feet, I've got some trail cameras set up around the park to track wildlife movement. I might have caught something on camera that you'd want to see. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. This was the break she had been waiting for. Could it be possible that Cal had captured footage of her family? Maybe it's worth taking a look, Cal continued, leading Ellie toward his truck where the camera footage was stored. Ellie's pulse quickened with each step. As Cal scrolled through the footage, Ellie's hope built higher and higher. There on the screen was a grainy but unmistakable image, a woman with shoulder-length hair, and two small children walking carefully through the forest. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. That's them, she whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. That's Rachel and the twins. Cal nodded grimly. I thought it might be. Look at the timestamp. The footage was captured just 3 days ago. Ellie's heart surged with renewed hope. They're alive, she thought. They're alive, but then the looming question returned. Where's Daniel? Cal zoomed in on the footage, trying to capture every detail. But there was no sign of Daniel. The family was together in the woods, alive, but where was Daniel? Ellie's chest tightened. Where's Daniel? She asked quietly, almost to herself. Why isn't he with them? Cal clicked through the footage again, trying to find any clue, but there was nothing. The camera only captured what passed in front of it, and Daniel might have been behind them, or perhaps he had taken a different route. Ellie's thoughts raced. No, she thought. Daniel wouldn't have left them. He wouldn't have left Rachel and the girls behind. Not in these conditions. Cal studied the footage in silence, his brow furrowing, as he tried to offer some explanation. This camera is fixed in place, he said, his voice low. It only captures what moves directly in front of it. Daniel could have been behind them, or he could have taken a different route. There's no way to know for sure. Ellie's heart sank. This was the first solid lead they'd gotten, and yet the most important part, the one she needed to understand, was still missing. Where was Daniel? Why wasn't he with them? Cal, sensing her growing distress, turned to her. I'll tell you one thing. If he was alive, he'd be with them. He wouldn't have left them. Not out here. Ellie nodded, though the doubt still lingered in her mind. What happened? The questions swirled, unresolved, and the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. As Ellie continued to gaze at the footage, her mind began to turn over the next important detail. The location. Cal pulled up a GPS map on his device and pointed to a marked spot deep in the northern section of the park. This is where the footage was captured, he said, his finger hovering over the screen. It's about 8 miles from here, through some of the roughest terrain in the park. Lots of unmarked ravines, unstable slopes. Not exactly a place you'd want to take kids. Ellie stared at the map, her thoughts racing. This was far from the main trails, from the areas that were typically hiked. The police hadn't even considered searching this far north, deeming it too dangerous. But now Ellie's mind was reeling. If they were there, why didn't anyone search? Why didn't the police come this far? She asked. They dismissed this area, said it was too dangerous. Cal nodded in agreement. It's not a place most people venture. And after the storms, they wrote it off completely. Too risky, too hard to navigate. But that's exactly why no one thought to look there. Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine. It didn't make sense. Why would Daniel take his family into such a dangerous area? Ellie had spent decades rescuing people from the wilderness, and now, for the first time, she found herself on the other side. Her son and his family were out there, somewhere, lost in the vast expanse of the park, and she couldn't rest until she found them. "I need a copy of this footage," Ellie said, her voice steady but urgent. "I need to show the police." Cal didn't hesitate. He was already transferring the file. "I can email it to you right now," he said, scribbling down his contact information on a piece of paper. "Here's my number. Call me if you need anything. I know these northern reaches well. If you need help, just let me know." Ellie took the paper, grateful for his support, though the real work was still ahead. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. This was the first solid lead they had in weeks, and Ellie wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. As Cal finished transferring the file, he glanced at his watch. "It's getting late," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "I'd better head back down before the weather worsens." Ellie nodded. She was about to make her way back to the lodge, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. There was still much to do, but now she had a reason to believe that her family might still be out there, waiting to be. By the time Ellie returned to the lodge that evening, a sense of exhaustion settled over her, yet the new lead had rekindled a faint flicker of hope. The footage from Cal's trail cameras showing Rachel and the twins alive after 3 long weeks in the wilderness, had given her a surge of energy she desperately needed. But questions still remained. Where was Daniel? Why hadn't he been with them? What had really happened on that mountain? With the file now safely transferred to her phone, Ellie wasted no time. She dialed the police department as soon as she entered her cabin, her fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. She needed to act quickly. She needed the police to understand the gravity of the new evidence. The footage was the first real break they had gotten since the search began, and Ellie couldn't afford to let it go to waste. The phone rang only once before it was answered, and Ellie's heart quickened as she heard Detective Marshall's voice on the other end. Detective Marshall speaking, came the familiar voice, steady and composed. "This is Eleanor Whitaker," Ellie replied, her tone clipped but urgent. "I've found something. I need to speak with you right away." There was a brief pause on the line, and then Marshall responded, his voice filled with caution. "What's happened, Miss Whitaker? Is there a lead?" Ellie couldn't contain the rush of words that spilled out next. "I've got 3 days ago, I saw Rachel and the twins alive, on a trail camera. They're not far from here, in the northern part of the park." Marshall was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the information. Ellie's pulse quickened as she held her breath, waiting for his response. He asked slowly, his skepticism clear despite the urgency in his voice. "What kind of footage?" "Trail camera footage. A local hunter, Cal Jennings, has cameras set up around the park for wildlife track. He's caught them on video walking through the forest, barely a few miles from where we're standing. The timestamp on the footage shows it was recorded 3 days ago. They're alive, Detective. Rachel and the twins are alive." Ellie's voice cracked with emotion, but she didn't. She had to make him understand the significance of this discovery. Ellie could hear the gears in Marshall's mind turning as he processed the new information. He let out a long breath before replying. "I'm going to need to see that footage," he said flatly. "We've been over every inch of the main trails already. If they've been in the northern parts of the park, that's news to us." "I'm sending it to you now," Ellie responded, pulling up the email on her phone and quickly attaching the video file. She hit send and her anxiety ratcheted up another notch. The next few minutes felt like hours as she waited for Marshall's reply. She stared at the screen, willing her phone to buzz, her eyes flicking to the clock ticking away the precious time. Finally the phone buzzed, signaling a new Ellie picked it up instantly, opening the message from Detective Marshall. She read the brief response, her pulse racing as she waited for him to confirm what she already knew. "Ms. Whitaker," Marshall's voice came back over the phone. "I've watched the footage. It's your family, all right. I can see Rachel and the twins clearly, though it's hard to say much else. It's not great quality, but it's enough to raise some questions." Ellie's breath caught. Questions. She had 100 questions of her own, but there was one question that dominated her mind above all others. "Where is Daniel? Where's Daniel?" Ellie asked, her voice tight. "Why isn't he with them? He should be with them." Marshall's tone softened, but his words still carried the weight of pragmatism. "We're not sure, Whitaker. It's possible he was off camera. This is a fixed camera. It only captures movement, that passes in front of it. He could have been behind them, or he could have taken a different route altogether. There's no way to be certain from the footage. Ellie's stomach churned with frustration. This was not good enough. Her son Daniel was missing, presumed dead by the authorities, and yet the only footage they had of her family showed Rachel and the twins moving through the forest alone.
I'm sending you the location of the footage, Ellie pressed. I need you to start searching that area. You've overlooked it. This is outside the usual search zone, I know, but it's where they are. They're alive, detective. They're alive. Marshall hesitated, clearly caught between the urgency in Ellie's voice and the protocols that had guided the initial search. We've already considered all the likely areas, Ellie. The weather conditions made it too dangerous to search the far northern regions. It's risky to send teams out there. There's a lot of unstable terrain, ravines, and high avalanche risk. It's not a place you take children in a storm. Ellie's mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of frustration. The police had scaled back their efforts, focused on the areas they thought were most likely to yield results. But they had missed this spot. The one area that Ellie now knew in her bones was where her family was. She knew that Daniel would never have ventured into this part of the park without a good reason. It was a dangerous area far from the familiar trails he had grown up on. He knew better than to take his family into such a place, unless something had gone terribly wrong, unless there had been a reason. Please, detective, Ellie pleaded, her voice sharp with urgency. I know this park better than anyone. I know where they are. I'm asking you to listen to me, please. Marshall was silent for a long moment, and Ellie's heart pounded as she waited for him to respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with a reluctant acceptance. I'll coordinate with the park authority. We'll assemble teams tomorrow, but I can't guarantee we'll have a search operation tonight. The conditions are getting worse. We can't risk sending anyone out there with limited visibility, Ellie. Not in these conditions. Ellie's frustration boiled over, but she held her tongue. She knew that Marshall was right in some ways. He was following protocol, doing what had been drilled into him for years. But Ellie had been in this situation before. She knew that when it came to the wilderness, time mattered. Every minute counted. I understand, Ellie said, her voice strained with exhaustion and anger. But you need to understand something, detective. You don't wait when people are lost in the wild. You go out there now. I know what I'm asking, but it's the only way we'll find them. Marshall sighed heavily on the other end of the line. We'll get to work at first light. The team will be ready. I'll make sure you're part of it. Ellie's grip on the phone tightened. I'll be there. I won't wait. My family's out there, and I'm not stopping until I find them. After the call ended, Ellie sat in her cabin, the weight of the last few days bearing down on her like a storm. She knew it would be a long night. She knew that every moment she waited, every hour that passed, was one more hour her family had to endure the cold, the snow, the isolation. As Ellie prepared herself for the search, she couldn't help but think back to the last time she had seen Daniel, the last message he'd sent her, the photograph of their family smiling together against the mountain. And now that image was frozen in her mind, a painful reminder of how much she had lost. But before tomorrow, when the search resumed, Ellie would fight with everything she had to bring her family back. Her thoughts were turbulent as she trudged through the footage from the trail camera had confirmed what she had hoped for, but it had also raised new uncomfortable questions. Rachel and the twins were alive, moving cautiously through the dense forest, but Daniel was nowhere to be seen. The questions began to pile up in her mind, each one more perplexing than the last. Why hadn't Daniel been with them? He wouldn't have left them, not in the middle of a dangerous storm, not in a place so remote. Ellie's mind couldn't make sense of it. Daniel, her son, was resourceful. He had grown up on these trails. He would never have allowed his family to be put in harm's way, not unless something had gone terribly wrong, something no one had anticipated. Her gut told her that there was more to the story. Much. She had known Daniel better than anyone, and the way he had always looked out for Rachel and the twins wasn't something that would just disappear. The deeper she thought about it, the more she realized that there were things her son had kept hidden, things she might not have understood until now. As she continued along the trail, Ellie's mind drifted back to Rachel. There was always something about Rachel that had unsettled her. Despite the affection she showed for her children, there had always been an edge to her, something in her eyes that spoke of hidden bitterness, unspoken resentments. Ellie had always chalked it up to stress, the pressures of raising two young children in such a remote location. with Daniel often away on ranger duty. But now, in the wake of this shocking revelation, Ellie couldn't help but wonder, was there something more? The wind howled through the pines as Ellie pushed forward, her mind set on the task ahead. The area Cal had pointed out on the GPS map was uncharted territory, far from the main trails, beyond the reach of even the most seasoned hikers. But this was where the footage had been taken. This was where Rachel and the twins had been, and Ellie had no intention of letting this lead slip through her fingers. Ellie knew this part of the park well enough to recognize that it was treacherous terrain. The ravines were steep, the slopes unstable, and the snow had been piling up for days. The chance of an avalanche was high, and the risks of venturing this deep into the park alone were enormous. But Ellie was beyond care. Nothing, not the wind, not the snow, would stop her from finding her family. She knew that she had to act fast. She navigated the path with the precision of a seasoned hiker, her every movement deliberate and measured. The cold air bit at her face, her breath coming out in jagged clouds, but she hardly noticed. It had been hours since she left the lodge, and though she had packed supplies, food, water, and a first aid kit, her focus remained fixed on the goal. She could feel her legs beginning to grow heavy with each step, but her determination outweighed her fatigue. It wasn't until after several more hours of grueling trekking that she saw it, something unexpected, something that should not have been there. Through the haze of falling snow, she caught sight of a structure nestled among the trees, partially obscured by the thick blanket of snow and pine. It was small but sturdy, the kind of cabin that stood out of place in the wild, isolated terrain. Ellie's heart leapt into her throat. She had expected to find some shelter, some trace of her family. But not this. The cabin was not listed on any official map. She had hiked these trails countless times, and yet she had never seen it. It was not a place she recognized, and it certainly wasn't a location any experienced hiker would venture to. The weather conditions had made it nearly impossible for anyone to build here without drawing attention, and yet there it was, standing resolutely in the midst of the wilderness.
Ellie approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. As she drew nearer, she saw that a thin stream of smoke was curling out from the chimney, evidence that someone had been inside recently. Could it be? Could they have taken shelter here? Ellie wondered, a glimmer of hope flaring within her chest. The cabin seemed ordinary enough, constructed of rough-hewn timber with a solid roof and a small porch, but something about it felt off, too isolated, too quiet. Ellie hesitated before stepping forward, her instincts telling her to proceed with caution. She knocked on the door, her gloved hands rapping against the weathered wood. No response. Ellie knocked again, this time louder, her voice rising.
Hello? Is anyone there?
"Please, I need help," she called, her breath fogging in the cold air. There was no answer, but Ellie wasn't about to give up. She knocked a third time, desperation creeping into her voice. This time, the door creaked open, revealing a face that Ellie had only seen in photographs, in missing person posters, in the quiet torment of her nightmares. "Rachel," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the woman standing in the doorway. Rachel's face was pale, her expression frozen in shock. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved, as if the reality of the moment had stunned them both into silence. Then, as if snapping out of her trance, Rachel rushed forward, pulling Ellie inside with unexpected urgency.
Ellie, what are you doing here?
Rachel's voice was filled with disbelief, her hands trembling as she helped Ellie remove her snow-covered layers. "I have been searching for you," Ellie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Where's Daniel? Where is my son?" Rachel's face faltered, her eyes shifting uncomfortably. We've been stuck here, Ellie," she said, her voice small, vulnerable. "I didn't know what to do. The storm. It's been so bad. We couldn't get back. We had no choice." Ellie's heart was pounding in her chest. She could feel the tension building, the questions flooding her mind. Why had Rachel been so quick to pull her inside? Why hadn't she said anything about Daniel? There was something wrong here, something Ellie couldn't quite put her finger on. Before Ellie could ask another question, she heard the soft patter of footsteps from across the room. Two small figures appeared in the doorway, their faces barely visible behind the wooden frame. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she recognized them. "Ivy? Ren," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. The twins emerged slowly, hesitantly, their eyes wide with uncertainty. "Grandma Ellie?" Ren asked, her voice barely a whisper, her small frame wrapped in a thick blanket. Ellie crouched down, reaching for them with open arms. "It's okay, sweethearts. You're safe now. I'm here." The twins rushed into her arms, their little bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. Ellie held them close, her heart aching as she realized just how much they had endured. The warmth of the cabin, the smell of the fire, and the soft murmur of the twins in her arms were a balm to her soul. They were alive. They were safe, for now. But Ellie's questions didn't disappear. They hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding the warmth of the moment. "Where's Daniel?" Ellie asked again, this time more firmly. Rachel's face fell, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He went out to get help. He said he would go find someone, but he never came back. I couldn't leave the girls alone." The words hung in the air, a heavy silence settling over the cabin. Ellie felt the unease creeping in once more. Something didn't sit right. Why had Rachel stayed behind? Why hadn't she gone after Daniel? Ellie glanced around the cabin, taking in her surroundings. It was simple, bare bones, but functional. There was a small wood stove, a bed with thin blankets, and shelves lined with canned goods and water. It wasn't a place for someone to stay for weeks, but it wasn't abandoned either. The supplies were fresh, too fresh. This wasn't a cabin that had been untouched for years. Someone had been using it recently. Ellie's eyes narrowed as she studied the room. There was something off about it, a subtle discomfort in the air. She stood up, her eyes scanning the corners of the cabin, and that's when she saw it. A glint of metal beneath one of the loose floorboards. Without a word, she crouched down, lifting the board carefully. Her fingers brushed against something cold, hard and metallic. When she pulled it out, her breath caught in her throat. It was a wedding ring. Daniel's wedding ring. "This is Daniel's," Ellie whispered, her heart pounding as she turned the ring over in her finger. It was clean, unmarred, as though it had never been worn or lost in the chaos of the wilderness. Rachel's face went ashen, her eyes darting away from Ellie's gaze. She didn't speak, but the guilt was written all over her face. The silence between them grew thick, heavy with unspoken truth. Ellie's mind raced. Why was the ring hidden? Why was it in a cabin that wasn't supposed to exist? The questions were piling up, and the answers Ellie was receiving were far from satisfying. She could feel it. The dark secret Rachel was hiding, the truth that had been buried under layers of fear, lies and guilt. But Ellie couldn't put the pieces together just yet, not until she had all the facts. As Ellie continued to examine the cabin, every new discovery seemed to deepen the mystery. The firewood stacked near the door, far more than any reasonable person would need in such a small, isolated cabin. The fresh supplies including milk, that looked recently purchased. And now, Daniel's wedding ring. Ellie turned to Rachel, her voice low but insistent. "If this cabin is abandoned, why are there so many supplies? Why are they so new?" Rachel's face flickered with something: guilt, fear, or maybe both, before she composed herself. "I told you, I think someone uses it regularly. Maybe a hunter or someone like that." Ellie's instincts told her that Rachel was lying. But what was she hiding? What had really happened up here in the mountain? Before Ellie could ask another question, a sudden movement caught her peripheral vision. It was Rachel, stepping toward her with something in her hands. But this time, the look in Rachel's eyes was different, cold, calculating. The shotgun butt slammed into the back of Ellie's head before she had time to react. The blow came suddenly, a sharp crack to the back of Ellie's head that sent her reeling forward. Pain exploded through her skull as her vision blurred for a moment, a strange ringing filling her ear. She barely had time to react before her knees buckled beneath her, and the ground rushed up to meet her. Everything went dark. The last thing Ellie remembered before unconsciousness claimed her was Rachel's cold, calculating expression, something that Ellie had never seen before in her daughter-in-law's eyes. For a brief moment, there had been no trace of the woman who had once been the kind and caring mother of her grandchildren. There was only a quiet, terrifying resolve, as though Rachel had known exactly what she was doing. When Ellie's consciousness returned, she was no longer in the warmth of the cabin. She was cold, her body stiff from the ropes that bound her to a wooden chair. The cabin, now dim and flickering with the faint orange glow of dying embers, smelled of something acrid, something chemical, and Ellie's throat tightened in response. Gas. She could smell it clearly now, the unmistakable odor of something dangerous, and it made her head spin. Ellie's eyes fluttered open, and she quickly realized that she was bound. Her wrists tightly lashed to the arms of the chair, her legs similarly restrained. Panic surged in her chest as she struggled against her restraints, but the ropes only cut deeper into her skin. She winced, trying to orient herself, her mind racing to piece together the sequence of events. Rachel, the shotgun, the twist. Ellie's mind grasped at the fragments of the moments leading up to her being knocked out. Rachel had done. She had hit her, knocked her unconscious, with a force she never expected from the woman who had always seemed so gentle. But now, everything felt wrong. Everything had changed in the span of a few moments. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the low light, she saw the cabin more clearly. The small room was now eerily still, save for the faint crackling of the embers in the fireplace. But the real danger lay in the air, the gas that was now leaking steadily from a source she couldn't identify. Her head ached with every breath she took, and the scent of the gas was growing stronger, suffocating her senses with each passing second. Ellie tried to move again, her arms straining against the ropes. The chair creaked as she shifted, but she couldn't escape. She looked around, desperate for a way out, but all she could see was the flickering light from the fire, and the empty, silent room. No sign of Rachel, no sign of the twins, and that was when it hit her. The twins, where were they? Ellie's heart skipped a beat. Had Rachel left them behind, or had she taken them somewhere else? It was a chilling thought, one that sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through Ellie's veins. The twins had to be somewhere in this cabin. They had to be safe. She wouldn't let them fall victim to whatever plans Rachel had in mind. But her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a scraping noise coming from behind her. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she strained to listen, her pulse quickening with anticipation. Was Rachel coming back? Was someone else here? Her thoughts were cut short as the door creaked open, and Rachel appeared in the doorway, her figure framed by the dim light from outside. But it wasn't just Rachel who stepped into the cabin. Behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man Ellie hadn't seen in what felt like years, a man whose presence now felt like an omen, a dark shadow from Ellie's past. It was Cal Jennings.
Ellie's breath caught in her chest. She locked eyes with Cal, the man who had once helped her, the man who had shown her the trail camera footage, who had pointed her in the direction of the truth. But now, standing in the doorway with Rachel, his expression was cold and distant, nothing like the ally Ellie had once thought him to be. Something in his eyes had changed. Rachel stepped aside and Cal moved toward Ellie, his face betraying no emotion. He didn't even acknowledge her at first, turning his attention to the gas stove, fiddling with the dials. Ellie's mind raced. Why was Cal here? What was going on? But before she could speak, Rachel's voice broke the silence, her words dripping with a cruel edge that Ellie had never heard from her before. "I never wanted this," Rachel said, her voice trembling with emotion, though it was clear that her tears weren't genuine. "I never wanted any of this. But Daniel gave me no choice." Ellie's stomach churned. The coldness in Rachel's tone sent a chill down her spine. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in her throat. She could barely move, let alone escape. She could feel the ropes biting into her wrists as she struggled to free herself, but it was hopeless. Rachel continued, her voice growing louder now, filled with an unrestrained bitterness. "I had to do what I did. Daniel, he wasn't going to give up the money, and after what he'd been doing with that woman, he had to be stopped. He would have ruined everything for me and the girls." Ellie's blood ran cold. What was Rachel saying? You're lying, Ellie whispered hoarsely, disbelief lacing her voice. Daniel wasn't like that. He would never have done what you're suggesting. Rachel's eyes darkened, her expression hardening into something Ellie could barely recognize. You don't understand, Rachel spat. He was going to leave me, Ellie. He was going to leave us. And he was going to take everything he had with him. He had just started talking about changing the will. Do you think I would let that happen? Do you think I would let him take everything from us? Ellie's mind was spinning. Her eyes were wide with shock as she tried to process the depth of Rachel's betrayal. This wasn't about survival in the wilderness. She realized this was something darker, something far more sinister than a simple accident or misadventure. And then the truth hit Ellie like a physical blow. Daniel wasn't dead by accident. He had been murdered, and Rachel was the one who had done it. The words felt like acid in her mouth. She killed him. As the realization sank in, Ellie's heart raced, her thoughts now swirling in a whirlwind of horror and disbelief. She turned toward Cal, her eyes wide with the desperate need for an explanation. You helped her? Ellie asked, her voice hoarse. You helped her cover up what she did. Cal's face twisted with regret as he finally met Ellie's gaze. The warmth that had once been there, when he had helped her find the footage, when he had offered his assistance, was gone. In its place was a quiet guilt. I didn't know how to stop her, Ellie, Cal confessed, his voice low and shaky. I didn't want to be involved. But when she offered me money, when she told me she would pay me to keep quiet, I stopped, his words hanging in the air like a noose around his neck. I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry. I thought it was just a small thing. I didn't think she'd actually do it. Ellie's body trembled with a mix of shock, disbelief, and fury. Cal had been complicit. He had been the one to help Rachel cover up Daniel's death, to keep her hidden away in this remote cabin for weeks, all while Ellie had been desperately searching for her family. The cold, calculated logic of Rachel's actions settled over Ellie like a suffocating blanket. Rachel had murdered Daniel for his life insurance. She had planned it, calculated every step, and then used Cal's help to keep herself hidden. Ellie felt a surge of betrayal so intense it nearly knocked her off balance. Cal had been the one to help Rachel stay hidden, to provide her with supplies, to cover up the crime. You helped her cover it up, Ellie repeated, her voice shaking with rage. You watched as my son was killed, and you did nothing. You stood by while she lied, while she manipulated everyone around her. You're just as guilty as she is. Cal's shoulders slumped, and he looked down at his feet, unable to meet Ellie's gaze. I'm sorry, Ellie. I didn't know what else to do. When I saw you, when I saw the way you were looking for them, the way you were fighting, I knew I had to help you. I knew I couldn't keep this secret anymore. Ellie's anger flared, but it was tempered by something else, a deep, aching sadness. You didn't just cover up a murder, Cal. You let my grandchildren believe their father was dead. You let them think their mother was grieving him. You let them suffer because you didn't have the courage to do the right thing. The room fell silent. Ellie's chest rose and fell with each labored breath, the full weight of everything that had happened now crashing down on her. Cal took a step toward her, his hands raised in a gesture of apology. But Ellie didn't want to hear it. She didn't want any more apology. She didn't need him to explain away his role in Daniel's murder. Rachel was the one who had killed her son, but Cal had been the one to help her. Ellie turned her head toward Rachel, her eyes locking with hers, as she spoke one final time. Where's Daniel? Tell me, where is he? Rachel's lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she simply turned her face away, unwilling to confront the woman whose son she had murdered. The mountain had always been Ellie's domain. She knew it like the back of her hand. The peaks, the ravines, the forest. It had been her sanctuary for years, the place where she had both rescued and been rescued. But tonight, the mountain felt like an impenetrable fortress. The storm had passed, leaving the night clear, but the wind had grown sharper. The snow now a thick blanket across the ground. Ellie had been forced to move, with calculated care, every decision of where to place her foot a matter of survival. She had been hiking in the darkness for hours now, guided only by the stars and her decades of experience. There was no map here, no GPS device she could trust. The only guide she had was her own deep connection to the land. The small cabin had burned behind her, flames licking at the sky like a warning. Rachel's trap, her attempt to kill Ellie and leave her to die in a cabin filling with gas, had failed, but Ellie's relief had been fleeting. The real challenge lay ahead. She was alone in the wilderness now, with only Wren's voice and the faintest trail of clues to guide her. Hours had passed as Ellie continued her search, every step taking her deeper into the wilderness. Her muscles ached, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The path had grown steeper and more difficult to navigate. Snow had begun to fall again, and visibility was quickly diminishing. The trail markers she had been following were now nothing more than faint outlines against the snow, barely visible through the thickening white mist. Ellie paused for a moment, planting her feet firmly, and then through the stillness, she heard it, a faint cry. Ellie's heart skipped a beat, and she froze, her body going still as she listened intently. There it was again, a soft, fragile voice, muffled by the distance but unmistakably clear. It was a child's cry. Wren. The thought hit her like a lightning bolt. Without hesitation, Ellie's feet were moving again, her pace quickening as the sound of the cry echoed through the trees. She wasn't sure how long it had been since she'd heard Wren's voice in the cabin, but this was different. This cry was full of pain, of fear. Ellie's pulse quickened, and every part of her focused on the sound. The voice grew louder, and Ellie's heart surged with hope. She pushed forward through the snow, her eyes darting around the dense forest for any sign of movement. Then she saw her, a small figure huddled in the snow. It was Wren. The sight of her granddaughter shivering and pale filled Ellie with a surge of both relief and terror. Wren's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, her ankle swollen and bruised. She was sitting against a rock outcropping, her face streaked with tears. The child's voice was strained as she looked up at Ellie, her eyes wide with pain. "Grandma Ellie," Wren whispered, her voice breaking. "It hurts. My leg hurts so much." Ellie rushed to her side, kneeling beside her granddaughter. She could feel the cold seeping through her own clothes, but her focus was solely on Wren now. With tender hands, Ellie examined the injury. The leg was badly broken, the tibia clearly fractured, but it was still intact. Ellie swallowed the wave of emotion threatening to rise. She couldn't afford to break down now. "Shao, sweetheart, it's okay," Ellie murmured, her voice soothing as she gently pulled off her scarf and wrapped it around Wren's leg, creating a makeshift splint. "I'm here. I've got you."
Wren winced in pain, but didn't cry out, her small body trembling as Ellie worked quickly to stabilize her. "Where's your mom?" Ellie asked softly, glancing around the clearing, her heart thudding in her chest. "Where's Rachel? Where's Ivy?" Wren sniffled, her tiny hands clutching Ellie's coat. "Mom, she said we had to keep going. She said we had to sacrifice." Ellie's heart sank. Sacrifice. Before she could ask more, Wren continued, her voice small and filled with confusion. "She said I had to stay here. She said she had to leave me." The words hit Ellie like a punch to the gut. Rachel had abandoned her own child. Ellie's thoughts raced. Rachel had left Wren alone. She had taken Ivy and fled. Her chest tightened as she realized the full extent of Rachel's betrayal. This wasn't just a mother making a desperate decision in the face of danger. This was something far darker, far more premeditated. Rachel had planned to leave Wren behind. She had left her alone in the freezing wilderness,
abandoned by the one person who should have protected her. Ellie's anger surged, but she pushed it down. Now was not the time for anger. It was the time for action. "Hold on, sweetheart," Ellie whispered, her voice calm and steady as she gently lifted Ren into her arms. "I'm going to get you out of here. We're going to make it back. I won't leave you, I promise." With Ren cradled against her chest, Ellie started the long journey back down the mountain. Each step was a battle. Every move, every breath filled with the weight of what had just been revealed. But Ellie wasn't alone now. Ren was in her arms, and Ellie wasn't about to let her go. The journey down was grueling, every step slow and laborious as Ellie made her way through the thick snow. The pain in her own body was overwhelming, but the pain in Ren's leg was even worse. Ellie moved as quickly as she could, but her legs were heavy, her body battered by exhaustion, and Ren's weight was a constant reminder of the stakes. They had to get back. They had to make it down before the storm returned. They had to reach the lodge, reach safety. Ellie knew the way, but the path seemed endless in the darkness. The snow had begun to fall again, the world around her growing softer, quieter. But Ellie pushed on. She couldn't stop. As they neared the base of the mountain, the first signs of life appeared. Hikers, staff members, and search teams were already making their way up and down the mountain, gathering to prepare for another day of searching. Ellie called out for help, and within moments, the scene erupted into frantic activity. The lodge manager was the first to reach her, his face filled with shock as he recognized Ellie and Ren. The staff and emergency personnel were quick to respond, ushering them inside, wrapping them in blankets, and attending to Ren's injury. "Get medical assistance," someone shouted, and within moments, Ren was whisked away to a waiting stretcher, Ellie by her side. Ellie was breathless as she watched Ren being tended to by paramedics. Her granddaughter was alive. She was going to make it. As Ellie stood near the medical team, trying to steady her shaking hands, a police officer approached her. His expression was grave, and his voice was low. "Miss Whitaker," the officer began, "we've received conflicting information. A woman who claims to be Rachel Whitaker was brought to the hospital earlier today." Ellie's heart stopped. "Rachel? Here? She's been arrested," the officer continued. "She's making serious allegations against you." The world seemed to tilt for a moment as Ellie's mind processed the words. What could Rachel be saying? What kind of lies was she spinning? "She claims you tracked him to the cabin, that you tried to harm her and the children," the officer said. "She says you tried to kill." Ellie's stomach churned. Rachel was lying. After everything that had happened, after the truth Ellie had uncovered, Rachel was trying to twist the narrative. She was trying to paint Ellie as the villain, as the one who had caused the chaos, the one who had abandoned her family. Ellie clenched her fists at her sides, her mind reeling, but there was nothing she could do now. The truth was out there. The police had enough to arrest Rachel for Daniel's murder, and with Ren's statement, there was no way Rachel could avoid the consequences of her action. Ellie had spent decades rescuing others in the wilderness, but this was the most important rescue of all, and she would never stop fighting for her family, no matter what came next. The legal aftermath of the rescue and the revelation of Rachel's betrayal was both swift and inevitable. Rachel was arrested on charges of first-degree murder for the death of Daniel Whitaker, as well as attempted murder for her actions toward Ellie and Ren. The shocking nature of her crimes rocked the small community, and the trial became a public spectacle. Rachel's lies, the manipulation of Cal Jennings, and the calculated murder of her husband were all laid bare in the courtroom. The defense tried to argue that Rachel acted out of desperation, but the evidence against her, Ellie's testimony, the statements from Ren and Cal, and the video footage, was irrefutable. Rachel was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal system, however, could not undo the damage she had done to her family. The emotional toll was far greater, and for Ellie it was a long and painful road to healing. For Ren and Ivy, the trauma of their father's death and the betrayal by their mother left deep scar. Ellie took custody of the twins, raising them with the love and care they so desperately needed. But the emotional recovery was slow. Ren, particularly, struggled with the weight of her mother's actions. Her broken leg had healed, but the pain in her heart remained. Ivy, too, found it hard to comprehend the full truth of what had happened, her youthful innocence shattered by the horror of her mother's betrayal. Ellie, as their grandmother and guardian, had to navigate the delicate process of helping the girls cope. She spent hours talking to them, listening to their fears, their questions, and their grief. Through it all, she remained a pillar of strength, determined to provide the stability and love they so desperately needed. Emotionally, Ellie was left to mourn not only the loss of her son, but also the family she had once known and trusted. The devastation of Daniel's murder, the lies Rachel had told, and the betrayal of someone she had once welcomed into her family, was almost too much to bear. But Ellie's resolve never wavered. Her love for her granddaughters pushed her forward, and slowly, together they began to rebuild their lives. The legal victory was bittersweet, offering justice for Daniel, but the emotional healing would take much longer, with each day bringing new challenges and moments of tenderness as they all tried to find a way to move forward. In the end, Ellie's resilience and her unwavering love for the twins were the foundation on which they would heal, a testament to the strength of a mother and grandmother's bond in the face of unimaginable betrayal.